What happens when a powerful politician tries to dismantle a black woman's credibility, only to realize she's armed with receipts, resolve, and the unshakable truth? The moment Pam Bondi smirked across the congressional hearing room, she had no idea she was about to ignite a fire that would burn far beyond those walls. The Rayburn House office building was rarely quiet, but that morning, the silence inside room 2141 was deafening. Not the kind that soothes, but the kind that crackles like a distant storm, a silence taut with the promise of confrontation. Fluorescent lights glared down mercilessly, bleaching the air with a cold, clinical glow that made even the most seasoned political operatives shift in their seats. Mahogany desks, polished to a sheen, reflected that sterile light like still water before a tempest. The tension wasn't spoken, but it was felt in every corner of the room, a vibration beneath the skin. Journalists lined the back row, eyes flicking, from notepads to smartphones, their fingers hovering, hungry for blood. Some of them had been in this room 100 times before, but today felt different. They weren't just covering a hearing, they were watching something about to combust. The energy wasn't procedural, it was primal. It reeked of performance masked as governance, of power plays disguised as questions. This wasn't a committee, it was a crucible. And someone, everyone knew, was going to burn. Jasmine Crockett sat still, unnervingly still, at the center table. Her suit was midnight blue, tailored like armor, sharp at the shoulders and smooth at the seams. Her hair was pulled back with precision, her earrings small but deliberate, elegant, defiant. Her hands, folded calmly in front of her, didn't twitch. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, scanned the room with the cool detachment of someone who had already mapped every corner of it. She had been here before. Maybe not in this exact building, not at this exact table, but in rooms like this, with eyes like those, voices like those. Rooms full of knives pretending to be pens. Across the aisle, Pam Bondi adjusted her microphone, the gesture small but surgical. She wore the kind of smile politicians reserve for campaign donors and chess matches, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Her blazer was ivory white, her hair pulled back just enough to suggest order, but left loose enough to hint at charm. It was a calculated image. Everything about her was a calculation. She tilted her head ever so slightly, a move rehearsed in mirrors and media training sessions, then scanned the room slowly, methodically, as if counting the exits, the allies, the opportunities to strike. She leaned forward, fingers grazing the microphone as if it were an extension of her power. And then she spoke. "While I absolutely respect the passion that drives many in this room," she said, her voice syrupy and slow, like a southern night, "this committee was built on facts, on strategy, not slogans or social media moments. The line was delivered with the precision of a blade." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The quiet that followed was heavier than any applause or gasp. The implication had landed. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't new. It was the same old play dressed in modern language, the attempt to reduce a woman like Jasmine Crockett into a caricature, emotional, loud, less than. But Jasmine didn't blink. Not once. Her silence wasn't empty. It was a weapon. It curled around Bondi's statement like smoke, choking the smugness from the air. Staffers on both sides stiffened. Someone coughed. A pen dropped and rolled across the floor, the sound oddly thunderous in the quiet. No one moved to retrieve it. The camera lights burned hotter now. Reporters glanced at one another, silently deciding which moment would define the day. The game had begun. The lions were not just circling. They had made eye contact. And one of them had just bared her teeth. For one long, stretching moment, the entire room seemed suspended, time slowing as if even gravity held its breath. Pam Bondi's words hung in the air, toxic and deliberate, laced with the kind of genteel venom that didn't shout, but whispered with a dagger pressed against your ribs. Her smile was still fixed in place, too even to be real. It was the smile of someone convinced they'd landed the first blow, but Jasmine Crockett didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react in the way Bondi had hoped she would. Instead, Jasmine simply looked at her. Not with anger, not with fear, but with the kind of silence that comes only from years of having to prove your worth twice over in rooms where you were never truly welcome. It was the silence of restraint, of knowing that fury is a luxury afforded to the powerful, but poise is the weapon of the underestimated. Bondi's smile wavered, and that was when Jasmine leaned forward, slowly, like the tide before a wave crashes, her fingers uncurled from each other. Her eyes locked onto Bondi's with surgical precision, not hostile, but surgical. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, yet somehow clearer than anything said that day. "Thank you," she began, "for reminding us how easy it is to dismiss people you've never tried to understand." A hush fell, thicker this time, dense like smoke. Jasmine's words didn't rise in pitch, didn't tremble. She didn't yell. She didn't raise a fist or pound the table. She didn't need to, because what she was building wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. I didn't get here through think tanks or donor dinners. I didn't charm my way into rooms like this with country club connections or private school alumni lists. I got here, she said, her voice gaining strength but never volume, by walking into jail cells and listening to kids tell me how cold it was at night because they didn't have socks. Socks, Miss Bondi, not lawyers, not a second chance. Socks, murmurs rippled through the room. Journalists began scribbling faster. One of the aides to the left of the chairman leaned over to whisper something to a colleague but never took, their eyes off Jasmine. Bondi blinked, just once. But it was enough. Jasmine kept going. I've stood next to mothers trying to scrape together bail for their sons because they were pulled over and couldn't afford a $300 traffic ticket. I've seen judges yawn while reading out sentencing guidelines that would gut a family's future in 60 seconds. So when you tell me activism doesn't belong here, she paused. I say ignorance doesn't belong anywhere. A sharp exhale came from someone in the back of the room. Half disbelief, half admiration. Phones went up. Cameras zoomed in. The clip was already being clipped, the moment already going viral in real time. But Jasmine wasn't performing. She was remembering, reliving. Every word she spoke was forged in experience, honed by nights spent in courthouses where the ceilings leaked and justice was something you begged for, not expected. Pam Bondi opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her fingers gripped her pen a little too tightly now, her knuckles whitening. Jasmine let the silence return, but this time it belonged to her. She filled it with everything she'd been forced to swallow over the years, every slight, every insinuation. Every time someone like Bondi looked at someone like her and thought, "You don't belong here." And yet here she was. Not as a guest, not as a symbol, but as a storm in a room full of matches. Pam Bondi, as always, tried to maintain her composure, quickly flipping through the papers in front of her. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, never left Jasmine, like a predator sizing up its prey. But something was shifting in the room. Bondi's usual confidence began to show cracks, subtle at first, but undeniable. Jasmine's words, laced with truth, were starting to unsettle her. What had once felt like a controlled environment was now turning into a battlefield. Jasmine had her opponent cornered, and with every word, she was tightening the noose. Jasmine knew the moment had arrived. Everything she had been building up to, the pain, the struggle, the years of injustice, was about to come pouring out. No more playing by the rules, no more staying silent. She was going to say what had to be said. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. This was the reckoning. She was about to dismantle the lies and expose the truth piece by piece. As the silence stretched out, Jasmine unfolded a single sheet of paper, not to read, but to make a statement. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She laid the paper flat on the table, each movement deliberate, as if she were preparing to deliver the final blow. "The truth," Jasmine began, her voice steady but laced with intensity, "is something you can't ignore forever, especially when it's written down, when it's been documented, when it's been lived. Pam, you've played your game, but now it's my turn." Bondi's face twisted, her jaw tightening as she tried to mask her discomfort. The room had gone silent, every eye fixed on Jasmine. She could feel the eyes of the cameras burning into her. She knew what she had to say next would change everything. She didn't flinch. "You were the Attorney General of Florida, Pam, and in that role, you allowed over 1 million people to lose their right to vote, people convicted of nonviolent offenses. Do you even realize how many lives were ruined because of your choices?" The air seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of Jasmine's words. Bondi opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Jasmine continued, her tone unwavering. "You fought against the Affordable Care Act while families in your state were dying for access to health care. People in your own backyard, struggling to survive, and you decided they didn't matter. That is your legacy, Pam." Bondi's fingers gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. She wasn't prepared for this. No one had ever called her out like this before. Not so directly, not so publicly. Jasmine wasn't just attacking her politics. She was attacking her character, her very soul. "And let's not forget," Jasmine added, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "the Trump University scandal, the $25,000 donation from the Trump Foundation right before you dropped the case against Trump University. That's not coincidence, that's corruption." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, locking onto Bondi's. "This is your pattern, Pam. You're not in it for the people. You're in it for power." Bondi's face turned a shade of red that Jasmine had never seen before. She was no longer the poised, controlled politician. She was rattled, exposed, vulnerable. Jasmine leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every word landed with devastating precision. "Your credentials are not the problem, Pam," Jasmine said softly, almost as if confiding in her. "The problem is what you've done with them. You've used your position to protect the powerful, to silence the voiceless, and to manipulate the system for your own gain, and that's unforgivable." The silence that followed was deafening. Bondi couldn't speak. She was caught in the web Jasmine had woven, and she knew she had no way out. The room was holding its breath, every single person there waiting for the next move. Jasmine wasn't done yet. She had one more thing to say. "You talk about credentials like they're the only thing that matters. But let me ask you this, Pam. Who do your credentials serve? The people? Or the system?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "I didn't get here because I'm a lawyer or because I've got money in the bank. I got here because I stand for something. I stand for justice, for people who don't have a voice. And I'll keep standing, no matter what you or anyone else tries to throw at me." Bondi's lips parted, but still no words came out. She was defeated, stripped of her power. The reality was undeniable. Jasmine had won this round, and the room knew it. The room had become a battlefield. The air, thick with unspoken tension, crackled with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something monumental to happen. Bondi's polished exterior, once unwavering, had begun to show cracks, her posture tightening as she struggled to maintain control of the situation. Every word she spoke now felt rehearsed, as if she were reading from a script that no longer fit the reality around her. Her fingers gripped the edge of the microphone, knuckles white with the effort of holding herself together. But Jasmine wasn't fooled. She could sense the change in the room, the subtle shift from Bondi's arrogance to something more fragile, more human. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she could expose not just Bondi's politics, but the very foundation of her power, the privilege and entitlement that allowed her to speak over people like Jasmine, to treat them as if they were invisible. Jasmine knew that now, in front of the world, was her chance to tear down the walls of hypocrisy that had been built around this system for decades, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. "Some believe you're here. More for symbolism than substance," Bondi said, her voice dripping with disdain. She let the words hang in the air, sharp and calculated, as if trying to draw a line between herself and Jasmine, between the real politicians and the so-called activists who dared to challenge the status quo. Bondi's words were meant to sting, to diminish Jasmine's presence. But Jasmine wasn't the one she should be worried about. "Say what you mean, Pam," Jasmine replied, her voice a calm storm. It was as if every ounce of the frustration she had ever felt, every insult she had ever endured, had converged into those 4 words. The challenge was unmistakable, a dare to speak the truth, not the carefully crafted lies that Bondi had relied on for so long. "You think I'm just here for symbolism? A photo op? A diversity checkbox?" Jasmine continued, her voice now low but undeniable. The words weren't just directed at Bondi. They were for everyone who had ever doubted her, who had ever reduced her to nothing more than a token in a broken system. She took a step closer, her eyes locked with Bondi's, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade into nothing. Her voice softened, but her gaze was unwavering. "You think that because of my skin color, because of where I come from, I don't belong here. You think I don't deserve a seat at this table." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. The silence that followed was palpable, the tension so thick it could almost be touched. "But let me remind you of something, Pam. I didn't get here by playing the game the way you want it to be played," Jasmine said, her words like a carefully aimed bullet hitting their mark. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, every eye focused on her, waiting for the next strike. Bondi's eyes flickered for a split second, betraying the first sign of uncertainty. It was brief, a mere second of vulnerability, but it was enough. Jasmine could see it. She could feel it in the air, the moment where the facade started to crumble. "You think that because I don't fit your narrow definition of success, I don't belong here?" Jasmine's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "Well, I'm here to tell you, you're wrong. I've outworked, outlasted, and out-argued every doubt, every obstacle, and every person who ever tried to tell me that I didn't belong." The room was silent now, the weight of her words lingering like smoke in the air. Bondi's facade, once so strong, now felt brittle, as though it might shatter with the next word. Jasmine was no longer speaking just to Bondi. She was speaking to the system itself, to everyone who had ever tried to box her in. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her voice steady and resolute. "Your kind of power comes from proximity to the rich, to the influential, to the people who can make or break you. My power comes from proximity to the pain of the people I fight for. I measure power by the lives that have been touched, the ones that have been lifted, not by the money in someone's pocket or the name on their business card." The room shifted. People weren't just listening to her anymore. They were feeling her words, understanding the gravity of the moment. Jasmine wasn't just challenging Bondi. She was dismantling an entire system, piece by piece, with every syllable. Bondi's hands, once steady and controlled, trembled slightly as they clutched the desk in front of her. Her polished demeanor was starting to falter, the cracks widening with every passing second. Jasmine had struck a blow, and Bondi was struggling to regain her balance. For the first time in the debate, it was clear that the power dynamic had shifted. Bondi was no longer in control. Jasmine was. "Let me tell you something, Pam," Jasmine continued, leaning forward slightly. "I didn't need your approval to be here. I didn't need to be invited into your world. I've built my own, and now you're going to have to deal with it." The room was still, as though holding its breath. Bondi, unable to find a response, sat frozen. Her silence was louder than any rebuttal could have been. The room felt the weight of the words spoken. The challenge issued, and for the first time in this entire confrontation, it was clear. Jasmine had won. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the echoes of that confrontation continued to reverberate across the nation. The debate had become more than just a political exchange. It had become a battle for the soul of the country, a conversation about who truly held power, who had the right to speak, and who was still being silenced. Jasmine's words, sharp and unforgettable, had ignited something in people. Social media was ablaze, every platform buzzing with the viral clip of the debate. It wasn't just about politics. It was about the human spirit, the resilience that came from knowing your worth in a world that often tried to deny it. People who had felt invisible, overlooked, or underestimated finally saw someone speaking for them, fighting for them in a way that made them feel seen. Coffee shops were abuzz with conversations about the debate. People who had never been politically active suddenly found themselves talking passionately about representation, about power, about what it truly meant to fight for the people. In living rooms and dorm rooms, college students debated the significance of Jasmine's challenge to Bondi, quoting her words like a mantra, inspiring each other to speak out, to stand firm in their own beliefs. One grandmother, who had never voted before, sat in her living room with her daughter, tears welling up in her eyes as she watched Jasmine's words again. "This is what leadership looks like," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She doesn't need to ask for permission, she just takes it." Her daughter nodded, understanding the weight of the sentiment. Across the country, Jasmine's message had resonated with a generation that had grown tired of being told they didn't matter. She had become the voice for the voiceless, the fighter for those who had been pushed to the margins. Her words didn't just break barriers, they shattered them. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi's silence spoke volumes. Her office, usually filled with statements and rebuttals, was now eerily quiet. There was no comeback, no attempt to discredit Jasmine. The reality was clear. Bondi had been exposed for the hollow figure she truly was, someone whose power was rooted in a broken system, not in genuine connection with the people. But Jasmine didn't need to revel in her victory. She didn't need the applause or the accolades. For her, this wasn't about winning the debate. It was about winning the hearts of those who had been forgotten for too long. It was about lifting them up and showing them that their voices mattered, that they too could take their seat at the table. Jasmine returned to her work, her real work, with the same fire and passion that had gotten her this far. There were more battles to fight, more lives to change, and she wasn't about to let the spotlight distract her from her mission. The fight had just begun. This wasn't just a political confrontation. It wasn't just about two women from different sides of the aisle clashing. It was about the countless times people had been underestimated, dismissed, or reduced to nothing more than their labels. It was about standing your ground when the world tries to make you shrink, about refusing to let anyone dictate your worth based on their biases or ignorance. So, tell me, when was the last time you stood your ground when the world told you to? Sit down. When was the last time you refused to be underestimated? Drop your stories below. Let's keep this fire burning.